Dawn took the city softly, with a gray light that moved like breath through the ribs of blackened walls. Smoke still lived in the stones of the Red Keep. You could smell it in the mortar when the wind came in off the bay. The shattered windows were eyes rimmed by ash. Somewhere below, a hammer rang, not the wild clatter of war but the measured patience of rebuilding. One strike, then silence, as if the city were counting its heartbeats and found them, for the first time in a long while, steady. Ghost's paws made no sound on the scorched flags of the throne room. He glided at Jon's side, pale as a winter moon, his red eyes reflecting the broken light, his breath white in the morning chill. Where a chair of blades had once hunched like a wounded animal, there was a low plinth of dark stone, bare and clean. The workmen had carted the melted iron away by the barrowful. Jon had stood and watched them do it, had heard the protests, felt the stares. He told them nothing of the way his chest eased when the last of it went clattering out the tall doors, told no one how the absence had become a kind of quiet. He laid a hand on Ghost's head and scratched behind the ear where the fur curled. The dire wolf leaned into him, an old comfort. On the plinth, someone had set a simple chair of oak, high-backed, black with oil, the grain rippling like river water. He refused the weight of it for now. He had slept little. He had dreamed less. He had not wanted this. That thought was an old track through him, worn smooth. He had followed it across snowfields and along cold shores and through the rubble of burnt halls, and it always led him back to the same place, to duty. He knew what he could bear and what he could not. He had learned the lesson the hard way, in the honest company of the dead. The door hinges sighed. The shape that emerged from the dim was Davos, smelling of salt and city dust, a roll of parchment tucked in his belt. The first finger of his right hand was still gone. He flexed the scar without thinking when he saw Jon, and the motion made him smile as if at a private joke. "Your Grace," Davos said, with a nod that was more friend than subject. "We've left that," Jon said. The words were a little stiff. He had said them many times now. The realm insisted, and he pushed back in the same fashion. "You know it." "Aye," Davos said. "We've left the iron. We've the weight yet, I think. If you never sit in that chair, it might still sit in you." Jon looked at the chair again, and past it, through the high window where the morning bred a careful gold on the shoulders of the city. Ships pricked the bay with masts like winter reeds. The muddy ribbon of the river winked. From here, even ruins could look like promises if you stared long enough. "There's bread in the streets," Davos said, "and water. Samwell has the ravens ready." Tyrion's men found 4 honest smiths, which is as many as a man can expect in one city. Yara Greyjoy sent us a cask of oil and a cask of insult. The insult is very fine. Jon let the corner of his mouth go. "Have we room for either?" "For the oil, no. For the insult, always," Davos said. He shifted his weight. "Today's the day." "Yes." Jon drew breath. The hall seemed to draw it with him. Davros glanced at the empty plinth. "The lads down in the yard will miss a speech if you mean to give one." "No speech," Jon said. "An oath. An old one with new meaning. The world has changed. We change with it or it swallows us." Davos rubbed his jaw, gray whiskers rasping under callus. "You make it sound simple." "It isn't." Ghost huffed, turning his head toward the open doors as footsteps approached. Sam came with a new weight about him. Not fat, but purpose, his black robes plain, the chain at his throat short and spare and honest. He had refused more links than the Citadel could understand. He wore the ones he trusted on his skin and left the rest to rust in letters. "You're certain?" Sam said, no greeting, no ceremony, only the question that had hung between them since Jon had spoken the plan aloud for the first time, in a ruined chapel with dust dancing in a wedge of light. Jon nodded. "We will be warned," Sam said. "We will be told we remember the wrong things. The Archmesters have already sent a letter, and the ink had barely dried before they had another ready. The Faith sent a man very polite and very angry. House Bar Emmon sent a pie. The pie was best. Everything that is about to happen," Davos said, "is too new for old men to bless it." "Not so new," Jon said. He felt the old words like the weight of a sword in his palm, quiet, resolute. Once, men set aside land and name and kin to stand against what the world feared. They did it because someone must. They did it for a wall. We do it for roads and rivers and doors. We do it for hearts that wake afraid. Sam smiled, his eyes shining behind the lenses of sleep. I made a change or two. You'll see. You and your changes. Davos grunted. When the Citadel kick you out for sense, I'll build you a better one. They walked together through halls that had known 100 whispers and as many betrayals. The sun came at them through the long slits of the windows, a slow procession of brightness over their faces. Ghost went before them, soft-footed. A piece of winter carried into the slow-blooming day. On a landing, Jon paused and looked down at the bailey, where men and women stood in a loose formation. Some wore black when they had had it to hand. Some wore dyed linen still drying charcoal gray. Some were in the clothes they had been born to, with a patch sewn clumsy over the heart, a tree of bare white branches pricked with crimson thread. The symbol had been argued over. The faith wanted stars, the crown wanted dragons, the north wanted wolves, and Jon had wanted none, only the vow. The tree had come to him under another tree, and he had not been able to refuse it. They moved like different rivers down to the yard, lords and craftsmen and the ones who had once slept beneath carts, the remnants of the gold cloaks who had chosen honest work, the sailors who had come ashore and did not go back to sea, a few quiet-faced free folk with braids and bone toggles, their eyes measuring and unafraid, girls with hair tied hard back from their faces and the set of the jaw that comes from choosing one's life, boys with hands too big for their wrists and a hunger that might at last go to good use. Every one of them watched him with something he had learned to stand in, something that burned if you feared it and warmed if you didn't. Hope. Tyrion was there as well, not in black but in a sober brown, his hair neat, his expression alert. He had become a careful man in careful clothes. They had spoken late last night, over ink and lists and a plate of olives he had claimed to despise. Tyrion had said, "They will call it a kingdom. Make it not a kingdom. Make it a duty. Make it a tool that breaks the hand that grips it wrong." He had smiled with half his mouth then, and the light had caught the scar on his cheek, and Jon had seen a man who had learned the arithmetic of blood. Jon stood before them. He put one hand on Ghost's ruff and the other on nothing at all, fingers spread in the unloved air. The morning was cool, and the smell of the river came clean for a moment, a blessing. "We remember what it was to wake in a darkness that did not end," he said, and his voice found them where they stood. He had not meant to speak, but the words were there. They had been there for days, gathering like the snow gathers in the corners of a field, quiet and inexorable, until the shape of the land is made new. We remember hunger and fear. We remember what men are when the world's law falters. A murmur ran through them, not assent, but recognition. "When I was a boy, I swore an oath under a tree of white. It was an oath of service," he said. "And I broke it and I kept it and it kept me and it broke me back into what I was meant to be." That oath did not name a king. It did not name a land. It named a duty. The world has more walls than stones. The world can be as cold as ice and never show you a single flake. You have known it. He let the words sit. Tyrion's gaze was a weight on the side of his face. Sam was breathing like a man about to wade into a winter river. Davos had his hands clasped behind him, the old shipman's stance, waiting for a wind to turn itself into work. "We will take that oath again," Jon said, quiet now. "We will not be what the Watch was. We will not be what kings have been. We will be the long night's answer in full daylight. We will have no sons in name and all the realm in charge. We will hold no keeps for pride. We will hold them for the roads. We will claim no wives as chattel and no husbands as prize. We will bind ourselves to the work alone. We will not feed on the realm. We will be the hands that lift its burdens." He drew the breath Sam had held for him. Sam's voice rose, surprisingly steady, and the words he had written were familiar and strange at once, as a man's face might be when you meet him after many years and recognize his eyes. "Night gathers wherever fear lives," Sam read, "and so does our watch. We pledge our lives not to a wall of stone, but to a wall of law that keeps the weak from the teeth of the strong. We are the blades that guard the peace. We are the wardens of the roads and river crossings, the watchers on the harbors, the keepers of the courts. We take no lands, father no lines, bear no sigils that would outlive our duty. We are the realm's shadow in the light, its memory of the cold. We give our breath and blood and names until the fear is gone and children sleep. This is our oath. He let the parchment drop, and a small sound ran through the yard like the sea finding stones. Say it, John said. If you mean it, say it. They did. Not in unison, because life is not a song, but in a ragged braid of voices. High and rough, northern and southern, women and men, old and raw. As they spoke, John felt something take hold. No magic, no wind. Only the solidity that comes when many lives lean in the same direction and find that their weight together can move boulders. When it ended, he stepped down into them, not letting anyone come forward first. He took the first recruit's hand, a girl with ink on her fingers, the black patch on her breast crooked but proud. He took the second's, a broad-shouldered man with a scar along his jaw that had the stiffness of recent knitting. He took the third's, a boy with wrists like reeds and eyes that didn't look away. He took a free folk woman's forearm and felt the knotwork of scars and old burns. He took a sailor's calloused grip. He looked at each of them as if they were the first and last person he would meet. Your first posts, Tyrion murmured behind him, Fishbone voice dry. The Rose Road, the harbors, the seps we can be allowed to enter without being set on fire. The fords, the gatehouses, the granaries, the coin vaults, the courts. He had a list. He always had a list. Old Town is sending a delegation. The Faith is too. I'll meet them, John said. Not here, Tyrion said, eyeing the gray slash of sky. In the dragon pit. There's room for a spectacle. And for guards. Davos put the parchment into John's hands. It's been copied a dozen times. By evening, 100. By tomorrow, half the city will have the words on their lips. And the other half will curse them, Tyrion said with equanimity. We can use both. Curses travel farther than praise. I don't want travel, John said, and found he was smiling despite himself. I want roads. Roads bring travel, Davos said. And armies. Let's have more of the first. The first day passed like water in a mill race. All the small turning cogs that make a great will move. A watch house on the hook where the river met the bay. The frame already up, the door to hang, the bed slats to plane, the oil lamps to be filled. A charter hammered onto a board with iron nails. No levy without labor. No levy without bread. No lord above the law within the watch's sight. Gendry came with his arms bare and black with soot and laid out what his forges could do and what they could not. He promised mail in quantity if given honest iron and fewer arguments. Street rats, no longer rats, children, darted between men's legs with buckets of water and bundles of kindling and a kind of ferocious joy. Ghost learned to step around them, patient as a winter sun. He did not sit the chair. In the afternoon he went with Davos and Sam down into the city and stood among the stalls on Fishmonger's Square and ate a heel of bread dipped in oil from a clay bowl. Some woman passed him with a nod and no awe. The harbor stink had a sweetness to it in summer that made the gulls manic. They wheeled and screamed, their clean white the only pure thing in a world of gray. A man of the Stormlands came and argued about a toll on his salt. A woman of the Reach came to ask if a debt could be forgiven because her lord was dead and the grain he owed had burned in the fires. He listened and answered, and where he could not answer, he asked Sam to make a note and Tyrion to find the name of a man who would know. He sees the world down here, Davos said, low enough for only John to hear. That will cost him sleep. But if we keep him in that high room, it will cost him more. Sam folded his parchment. I sent ravens, he said. One to Winterfell, one to Old Town, one to the Eyrie, one to Riverrun even though I don't know who will find it there. One to Dorne, though I wrote 3 drafts before choosing the least likely to be called offense. One to the Iron Islands, but I sent that one with a man who can swim. You've done enough to make a life, Davos said. We'll give you 2. Jon looked west. The sun had dipped slightly, and the shadows in the lanes made canyons of the streets. Children's voices came like birdsong, a game with the slap of hands and a chorus of shouted rhymes. For a moment, the city looked like something that could stand. Sansa will come, Sam said. If only to tell you 50 reasons this is a mistake. I'd like to hear all 50, Jon said, and meant it. She will only need 3, Davos said. If she has 50, we're done for. 3 is the number wise people need to end fools. Jon touched the wolf at his side. She'll come, he said. She knows when to hold a thing she would not have chosen. By sunset he stood in the dragon pit, and the sky above it was the color of iron drawn thin. It was a story of bones. The ribs of the dome, the broken teeth of the tiers where the crowds had once shouted themselves hoarse at a family's pride. Now it held a sparser assembly, the men of the city who had chosen to place their badges at Jon's feet. The first of the September with his soft-lidded eyes and his lips thin from many pious calculations. The Old Town delegation led by an archmaester whose link of gold lay half-hidden under gray wool. A girl from the Stormlands in mail with blue enamel, who had once been promised to a different king. A mummers' troop that had been pressed into service carrying the casks of water on their shoulders. The few lords of the Crownlands who had not fled and the fewer who had returned and bowed their pride to the work. There was a murmur that was less hostility than anxiety. He could smell it like fox musk on a winter air. The fear of something that will not hunt you but will change your forest. Tyrion took the center first, to draw their eyes and their ire. He explained the oath without apology. He called it a charter and not a decree. He spoke the phrase courts of fairness as if it were a part of the body as necessary as the hand. He let his voice curl around the words that would anger men who must be angered. He was surgical with his provocations, letting pride bleed without dying of it. The archmaester stepped forward, the chain at his throat clinking like a small, neat river. You can call it new, he said. But men have made such orders before. They do not end well. Men without sons are men without anchors. Men without lands are men who make the world their land. In the end, they remember themselves. In the end, they take more than any lord who at least is bound to place and name. Jon listened. He had expected as much. Then bind us better, he said. Bind us to the roads and the rivers and the bridges. Bind us to grain stores and to fair weights and measures. Bind us to the counting of coins and the tallying of debts. Bind us to days with no glory and to nights with little sleep. Bind us where your books live, and if we try to make ourselves more than the work we are sworn to, unmake us with law. The archmaester's mouth did an interesting thing then, losing certainty for a heartbeat. Your men will be soldiers. Will you give them over to pen and ink? They'll be soldiers when they must, Jon said. When they don't, they'll be something better. The first of the September inclined his head. You have a heart for the poor, he said, which sounded to Jon's ear like the beginning of an accusation. But is it piety that moves you? No, Jon said. I don't know that it's anything but memory. When you've seen what people become when they're hungry and afraid, you either hate them for it or you decide you can't ask more of them than the world did. And kings? The first asked, mild as milk. I've seen what kings become. He felt the wind move. The dragon pit hummed with listening. Tyrion's eyes were bright, Davos's steady, Sam's generous. The realm has had its kings, Jon said. I'm not the cure for what kings are. The work is the cure. We're here to make a thing strong enough to survive the kind of man who would break it. We're here to make it so that if a child shakes a lord's hand at market, the lord thinks of the law and not of the price of the child. We're here for small things that add up to winter being less deadly. Yara Greyjoy barked out a laugh from the tears, one leg thrown over the other, eyes golden with mockery and a thin seam of respect. We'll see if your roads carry more fish or more soldiers, she called. We'll see if your courts hold when a lord's son is dragged before one. If you do what you say, we'll find you salt. If you don't, we'll find you storms. Both will be useful, Tyrion said under his breath and made a note. They argued until the stars began to come in, one by one, as if someone poked holes in the sky for light to escape. There were compromises that tasted of sawdust and a few points Jon would not yield. He would not allow a tithe on bread sold in the market in winter months. He would not allow the faith to appoint judges from among its own where the watch had courts. He would not accept the Citadel's oversight of his officers, but he invited a permanent delegation to live in the watchhouses and write and be difficult. The Archmaester found that difficult invitation interesting enough to stay his pen. Ghost lay at Jon's feet and dreamed, paws twitching, a soft noise in his throat that remembered snow. When the last of the words had been spoken and men had said all there was to say, and when the night had taken its first, long breath over the city, Jon went up the steps, every board creaking, and looked out across the domeless ruin to the world beyond. Roofs clustered like barnacles, the river a black blade, the bay a sheet of hammered metal. He closed his eyes and saw a road instead, straight as a promise and lit by watchfires at intervals of measured law. He did not yet see the knives that would be carried along that road, but he knew they would come, and he counted them among the costs. Sansa came with the SEC. On dawn, she entered the hall not as a queen announcing herself, but as a sister returning to a place she did not trust and would not abandon. Her hair was braided simply, the fur at her throat made from the skin of an animal that had known winter, not a Southron trim with a fancy name. Behind her was a guard with eyes like cut ice, and behind him a pair of girls with the quiet competence of those who know that to serve is a blade one can learn to wield. Jon felt the floor under him differently for a moment. It became the packed earth of Winterfell's yard, a boy's boots on it, the breath of a wolf like a blessing. He took 2 steps and then let her close the distance because it mattered, because it said that a crown, any crown in any form, would not erase the shape of them. She looked at the empty plinth. She looked at the chair of oak. She looked at him. She did not smile, but her eyes softened in the corners, the way they had when they were children, and she brought him a pastry she had stolen from a cook who pretended not to see. "You are pale," she said. "You are sleeping too little. You are warm," he said, answering nothing and everything. "The road south was kind?" "A road is not kind," she said. "It is there or it is not." He took that in an honest correction. Ghost pressed his head against her hip, and she put her hand on him and let the wolf's old presences bridge what words would bruise. After a moment she said, "You tell the world you do not claim a throne." "I do not." "You call that not a throne?" She flicked her eyes at the black chair, then at the watch patches on chests, at the parchments spread like a general's campaign of roads and courts and rights. "You call that not rule?" "I call it an answer," he said. "That is what men say when they believe they can do what others have not without paying the same cost." Her voice was not unkind. It had the clarity of a winter day. "You are making a thing that does not belong to a name. Good. That is a guard against some ills. It is not a guard against all. Swords without names still cut. Laws without names still bind. If you make proof that men can be noble without being ordered to, you will be carving the grain against itself." "What would you have me do?" he asked, and heard the weariness in it and despised it. "Leave the city to its lords? Let them squeeze it until the fruit is stone? Call back a council to choose a man who will make a different list with different names and the same emptiness? I would have you make every place you put your hand so transparent that when you are gone, no one can hold it without the people knowing." She stepped closer, and he remembered the look she had worn when she lied to monsters and made them believe her. "You say you have no sons. Good. That is a wall. Make more walls like that one, not of men, but of rules that even you cannot break without shame." "Sam writes them," Jon said. "And you?" Sansa asked. "I listen. Listen harder." He smiled then, a real smile, crooked as a broken road. "Tell me 3 things," he said. 3 reasons why this will fail. Only 3. She did not look at Tyrion, who had approached on soft feet and thinner breath. She kept her eyes on Jon. 1. Men will take your oath for bread and melt the oath for coin. 2. Lords will use your courts until they cannot win in them. Then they will use their swords. 3. You will be told that in order to protect the weak you must do something that makes you the kind of strong the weak will fear. If you answer those 3 rightly, you will need fewer answers for the rest. And the answers? Bread that does not depend on service, she said, surprising him. A fund that feeds those who come to you, even if you turn them away. So they don't come to you because they are starving. So the oath is not a hunger's word. For the Lord's, she let the word sit between them like a dark loaf. You must be boring. Your courts must be dull. They must be regular. They must be honest and humiliating in their predictability. If you make glory, they will come for it. If you make boredom, they will yield to it. And the last. She hesitation was almost nothing, almost not there, and in it he saw the edge of things she had known and never said. When the choice comes to make a fear, make it of yourself alone, and make the fear clean and without relish, and then pay for it in a way only you can pay. And do it sparingly, and speak of it never as a victory. Silence lay very gently for a while. Tyrion made a small sound that might have been admiration, or grief, or both. You came far, Jon said, to tell me what I needed to hear. I came for other reasons, she said, but I won't pretend it wasn't one. She took his hands then and looked at his face as if she were reading a page by poor light. I will not kneel to you. I did not ask. You will not send your black cloaks to make my border into your road. I will not. You will treat with me as with a sovereign equal. I will. Say that before witnesses. I will. She turned, then, to the men who had gathered in the doorways and along the edge of the room as if they were drawn to gravity. She said it again, clearly, and he said it after her, and the words had the quiet relief of truth laid down plainly. Davos wrote them. Sam sealed them. Tyrion smiled with his eyes and not his mouth. When she left him, she did it with a squeeze of his fingers that belonged to a world before crowns. And Ghost watched her go with a patience that made Jon remember the taste of snow on a cold tongue and hot juice on a summer day. By the 3rd day, the roads began. They started within the city because a thing must begin where your hand can reach it. Men and women measured with rope and rods. They pounded stakes. They tore up the cobbles of streets that had once been ruled by mounted men with golden cloaks and replaced them with something that took carts better and held in a rein. Tyrion found labor where others found thieves. He opened the guilds and told them a secret they pretended not to know, that honest work was less costly than guards. Gendry's forges sang, and the song was low and steady and smelled of iron and old sweat and bread. Jon walked. He walked the measured lines and the places where the measures had failed, where a shop jutted out like a tooth and could not be moved without breaking a mouth. He listened to the arguments in the doorways and at the corners. He watched men lay out plumb bobs like rosaries. He watched a girl with a scar on her lip lay a line of chalk with a precision that quieted 20 men. Why not brick? A man asked him, because stone is stubborn and your city is cracked. Let it learn to breathe and hold, Jon said, and when the man frowned, he knelt and set his hand to the ground and felt the give in it and the old water that lived under everything, and the man's face changed as if Jon had shown him where the bones were in a body. Word traveled out from the city like a wind that knew exactly where it wanted to go. The parchment copies of the oath became stories. The stories became arguments spoken over beer. The arguments became letters written by men who had never written before, scratching their names with care as if names were new tools you could learn to use on purpose. A miller told a reeve that the watch would make a fair weight ring true and would punish a man who shaved a stone's thickness from a measure. A widow told her sister that a woman had sworn the oath and had been given a baton of office and no one had laughed, and that when a man had laughed later she had broken his nose in such a way that even he had laughed at the neatness of it. An orphan told a dog that his next meal would not depend on who he could steal it from. Outside the city, at the first watch house on the Rose Road, Tormund Giantsbane stood with his hands on his hips and looked at the work with the greedy joy of a man who has discovered he can make another kind of trouble. He had come with 24 free folk who had already broken 3 picks with enthusiasm and had made friends with a baker and enemies with a lord by accident. "You call this a road?" he said to Jon, when Jon rode out with a handful of black cloaks and ghost trotting. "Where I come from, a road is what a man calls the place between his foot and where his foot is going." "A road is a promise," Jon said. "H&H," Tormund said. as if the sound were a weighing in a merchant's hand. "Here's my promise to you. Some lord comes with a sword to tell me where to put this stone. I'll make him hold the other end of it." "That's the right use of a lord," Jon said. They laughed together then, old cold shared like bread. Tormund thumped him on the shoulder and then, unexpectedly, leaned his forehead against Jon's for a beat, the old way. "I came south to see if you were making something worth fighting and breathing for," he said. "If you weren't, I'd have taken you north by the sleeve and told you we were done with the south. I think I can stay a little. I'm good at scaring men into honest work." "You're good at scaring men," Jon said. "There's no other kind," Tormund said, and spat neatly into the mud, and then set his foot on a sled and hauled like a man who had chosen to be useful. The first test came quietly. It did not look like a test. The world rarely announces itself so cleanly. It came as a merchant of the Crownlands with a wagon of grain who did not want to pay the small levy that fed the watchhouse. He argued and sneered and counted his coins with a lick to his fingers and a story about how much he had given to a certain lord's man. A woman in gray-black told him that the levy was for the lamp oil in the watchhouse and the water for the horses and the bread for the graveyard shift. And he laughed, and then he went to the Lord's steward with his complaint. The steward came with 8 men. They were decent men by the measure that had governed the city before. They were men who wore their livery as a second skin and their disgust at the sight of new law as a third. They told the woman that she would put her hand out for a coin that came from their lord, or they would see what her hand was worth without her body attached. Tormund had been on the far side of the road, teaching a boy how to lift the end of a stone with a lever and not his back. Jon had been speaking to a mason about how to join 2 old walls with new mortar that would hold both. The confrontation was small, born of small men's habits, and had the potential to expand as a fire does when it finds a window in a windy room. Jon walked into it without his sword drawn. He did not speak first. He stood. He was a quiet man with a wolf at his side and a cloak that any common man might wear and a scar on his cheek that looked like a word someone had tried to write on him and had failed to finish. He took the levy coin from a little box, an honest copper, stamped with a tree and a line of text that meant nothing to those who could not read and much to those who could, and set it on the steward's palm. "Lamp oil," he said. "Water for horses. Bread for the graveyard shift." The steward looked at the coin, then at Jon. He smiled. It was a precise smile, a thing done as if in a mirror. "His lordship appreciates your charity." "Not charity," Jon said. "Law." The steward's smile did not shift. He took the coin between finger and thumb and flicked it, and it fell into the ditch. Tormund made a noise that had no patience in it. He stepped forward like a door being kicked open, but Jon put out his hand without turning and Tormund stopped, as he would have if the hand were the edge of a spear. "You'll take that coin from the ditch?" Jon said to the steward, as if telling him the day's tasks. "You'll pay the levy properly after. And if your lord asks you why you bent your back, you'll tell him you did it because I said so. If he asks who I am, you'll tell him I'm the man who will make him do the same thing if I have to." He wouldn't like that. He said it without heat. That mattered. The steward heard something in that absence. He looked at the 8 men with him, and their faces gave him no comfort. He looked at Ghost, who had tilted his head, curious. He looked at the woman, who had the baton of the watch in her hand and had no fear in her eyes, only a temper that had been harnessed to something it trusted. He bent as men bend when they know what will happen if they do not. He picked the coin out of the mud and wiped it on his sleeve and put it into the box and took out 2 more and left them beside it, his hands shaking, and he told himself a story about how he was not afraid of any of this and was only doing what he must. Jon let him have that story. It was a cheap mercy that cost the world very little. When the steward had gone, Tormund grunted. "You could have let me pull his arms off," he said. "And then what?" Jon asked. Tormund considered. "I would have made him carry the stone with his teeth." "Let's not make that law," Jon said. They laughed, and the men who had come to do a small cruelty and had left with a small humiliation learned a tale to tell that would travel better than a beating. It would do more work. By the 10th day, letters began to answer the ravens. Old Towns came with a crispness to the parchment and a smell of lavender. The hand was fine, the sentences careful. They did not bless his watch, but neither did they damn it. They requested 100 things, as if requesting were a sport. They wanted statistics of grain and leaven. They wanted measurements of axle widths. They wanted the average distance between watchhouses, and the rules of jurisdiction, and a copy of the oath signed by men who could be made to account for it later. They wanted a record of levies collected and how many candles burned in which windows. They wanted knowledge not to praise or punish, but because knowledge itself was the coin they trusted. Sam read the letter and smiled the way a man smiles when he sees a favorite enemy advancing over a hill in good order. The Faith's letter came bound in blue ribbon and sounded like a father's grievance and a mother's worry at once. It asked if John meant to supplant the seven-pointed star with a tree. It asked if he meant to sit in judgment of men's souls. It asked what place mercy had in law, and whether law without mercy was simply another name for fear. John answered himself, his script tight and upright, telling them that mercy without law was a starving child given a loaf that would be taken from him at the corner, and that law without mercy was another kind of hunger. He asked them to send men who could read and who were not afraid to find out that people needed less prayer than bread. The 1st of September sent back a small, perfect loaf with a note pinned to it that said, "We shall see." From the north came Sansa's second letter, with the bluntness of a woman who has seen a hard winter and knows when spring lies. She sent grain, and men who knew how to build a road through ground that will heave when it freezes. She sent a map with notes in the margins where bridges could be repaired and where they must be torn down and built anew. She sent a warning. There were lords in the neck who remembered the old ways of toll and ambush, and who would not easily break the habit of making the world pay for passing through them. She told him 3 names. He wrote them down and put the paper under a cup so the names would stain and become part of something used. Dorne replied with flattery thick as perfume and an invitation to negotiate the Watch's role in their lands, and an offer of contingent coin if their pride were respected and their trade made better. The Vale sent an assurance that their roads were their roads and would remain so. A cold message written by a swift hand, with one sentence at the end in a different hand. If you mean to make the world less cruel, my lord, come speak to me where the wind meets the mountain and bring no banners. Aaron. He held that letter and looked out the window until the light had moved across the floor and the room had turned a little. The Iron Islands sent nothing. Then Yara arrived in person, grinning, with 3 ships that had seen more storms than most men's sea days. She brought oil and hard bread and dried fish and a claim that made Tyrion roll his eyes and call for ink. They argued and then laughed and then argued again. She made him promise not to seize a dock without paying for it. He made her promise not to seize anything she could not carry at a dead run. She asked him what he would do with a raider who used the watchhouse lamps to see where the best plunder lay. He told her he would hang him by the height of the lamp, so the world would see him there. She nodded, satisfied, as if she had been waiting to hear that he was not afraid to be seen. At night he walked the city. He did not hide. He wore the black and the tree, without cloak when the summer let him. Ghost walked in the shadow he cast and then stepped out of it when men needed to see him. He stood at a corner and listened to 2 men argue about whether the watch would be like all the rest. The same men in different men's clothes. He watched 2 girls share a piece of fruit and eat it so carefully that it made his chest ache. He made a man return a purse. He made a boy keep a bread heel he had stolen because the baker had counted wrong and had meant the boy to have it. He watched a woman wash her steps and knew she wanted her mother to think well of her house and that her mother was dead. He went home and slept 2 hours and woke with the sun in his eyes like the surprise it never stops being. On the 11th day, a man tried to kill him. It was not grand and it was not even well done. He was in the yard, speaking to Sam about the placing of a waypost that would tell travelers how far they were from bread and water, when a thin man in a decent cloak stumbled as if he had caught his toe on a stone and came at John with a knife. The knife was narrow and meant for gutting fish. The man's hand shook. Ghost was faster. The wolf hit him in the hips and brought him down and stood with his jaws at the man's shoulder, not closing them, because John had said 1,000 times no and had meant it. Tyrion looked at the knife as if it were a word in a language he had almost known once. Davos pushed the man's face into the dirt and took the knife and stood, as if he had discovered that his body remembered things it had never been taught. Sam's heart was beating loud enough that John, standing next to him, heard it. "Who sent you?" John asked when the man had been tied and hauled against a post. He had not raised his voice. He would not give the taste of drama to a coward's throat. "No one," the man said, the restraining ropes making his voice higher. "I came alone. Your unfinished business." There were 100 reasons a man might say that. The city was full of them. John did not ask which because it didn't matter. He took the knife and balanced it on his palm. "He came to kill me," he said, for the sake of the men and women who had stopped what they were doing and made a ring of silence. Tormund had arrived from nowhere, as big men do when they're light on their feet. He had an opinion. Pull his shoulder out and let him carry water to feel what he tried to do. The old law would have hanged the man or cut his hand and made a show of it. John felt Sansa's third warning in his bones like a cold he'd never quite thrown off. He looked at the man. He was nobody and everybody, a person who had been told a story and had believed that a knife could make it true. He gave the man over to the courts of the Watch, where a woman of 50 with a face like a field stone and a mind like a plumb line listened to him and weighed him with a care no Lord's Hall would ever give. She sentenced him to work in the charnel house where bones were sorted. She told him what it meant. He turned gray as ash. He went because for black cloaks walked with him, and because the world, for once, held him up on either side instead of letting him slide into the gutter and drift. That night, John went to the ruined sept and stood under the broken ribs of its dome and looked at the night. He did not pray. He did not know how or knew too many ways and trusted none. He thought of the knife. He thought of all the men who would come with better knives and better hands and better lies, and of the women who would smile at him with pity before they ordered him unmade. He wondered if he had asked the right things of himself and whether he had made the world shoulder a weight that belonged to him alone. Ghost leaned against his thigh, warm. John set his hand on the wolf's head and let himself feel that warmth, not as respite but as true measure. Then he went back to the work. The first chapter of The Watch, not in books but on the road, was a posting at a ford 3 miles out of the city. The ford had been a place where men with spare swords sat in a clump of trees and took coins for not hurting people. It became, slowly, over days and then all at once in the sudden way that comes from deliberate labor, a place where men and women with batons and copies of the levy stood in the open and took pennies for oil and water and salt and nothing else. A man came in a fine cloak on a fine horse and attempted to ride through. He was stopped by a girl with a slate and a piece of chalk. He spat near her feet and said a name that would have meant fear last month. She asked him kindly to repeat it because she wanted to spell it right. He looked at John, and John looked back at him and at Ghost, and at the water where it curled over stones that had not yet learned their new home. The man took out a coin very slowly and set it down, as if coins were things he had invented and might disown if the world forgot who made them. "Do you know what happens when men like me pay levies to men like you?" he asked. "Yes," John said. "People eat. You think that's funny. I think it's exact." The man rode on. He would tell a story around a table with candles about the indignity of it all. He would be listened to by men who were measuring the distance between their pride and their hunger, and the men would say very little and remember very much. In Old Town, an archmaester dipped his quill and began writing a new entry in a new book on the nature of oaths in times of prosperous fear. In the Eyrie, a young lady stood with her hands on the high stone of the Vale and thought about boredom as a weapon. In Dorne, a princess traced a line on a map and considered how much grain to trade for a share in law. In the Neck, 2 old men counted their knives and their grandsons and folded their maps into their shirt fronts, and one of them laughed and said, "The boy thinks he can walk on water. Let him try on this mud." In the Iron Islands, a woman bent over a barrel of salted cod and smiled and told her men to oil their lines and clean their nets, because the road would bring buyers who did not smell like old guilt. The city slept sometimes. When it did, John lay on his back in a bed that was plain and thought of nothing at all on purpose, because thinking would tear you apart if you let it be the only thing you did. He slept with a hand in Ghost's fur. He dreamed of black trees with red leaves and of children running under them with bread in their hands and no fear in their legs. He dreamed of his father's voice and of a mother. He had known only the way a man knows the sound of the sea when he has lived too long inland. He woke before dawn and went down to the yard and lifted stones until the ache in his arms made sense of the ache behind his eyes. He had thought power would feel like a weight. It felt like motion, like a wind that never stopped, that held you up if you leaned and threw you if you balked. He learned to lean. When the first black banner went up over the first watch house on a road that was not yet finished, people came and stood and looked. The banner was not elaborate. It was a plain cloth with a white tree and 7 small red leaves, one for each kingdom that had agreed so far to let the watch hold courts within their borders, and 1 leaf missing where it would be when the last said yes. People stood and looked and said, "It's not much." And then they went in and found clean water and a polite man who asked how far they were going and whether they needed to rest, and they said to each other, "It's enough." And to some of them it was the first time in their lives that anything had been. There were songs, because there are always songs. The first were poor, made of repetition and want. The second were better, made by people whose livelihood had never depended on who they cowered to. Someone wrote a nonsense song about coins and oil and bread that children sang in a circle until John wanted to go out and tell them to sing it more quietly and, at the same time, feared the day they would sing it no more. Sansa wrote again. Arya sent a letter that had 3 words on it and a drawing of a ship that had the wrong sails and was charming and wrong in equal measure. Bran did not send a letter, but ravens came that perched near Jon and watched him with heads cocked, as if they were reading him to themselves. He felt the old chill walk along the base of his skull and did not resent it. Ghost huffed at the ravens, and the ravens hopped and regarded him as if he were a small god who had chosen fur. He had not yet gone north. He meant to. He meant to go up and put his hand on the old stones and tell the northern sky that he had done this thing and that it would not own him. He meant to bring back a handful of the snow that had taught him what cold was and keep it in a stone bowl in a cool room and look at it when he thought he would forget. He meant 100 things, and every day the city put a hand on his sleeve and said, "Not yet." On the 20th day, it rained. A hard, clean rain that made the stones smell like new bread and beat the dust down so that for a few hours it seemed the city had been washed of its old grief. He stood in it and let it soak his hair and his clothes, and he laughed in a way that frightened Tyrion and comforted Davos and made Sam look as if he were watching a man step out of a story and into a life. "Tyrion," Jon said as the rain ran along his jaw and dripped from his chin, "what do you call a kingdom without a king?" "A very expensive idea," Tyrion said, squinting at the water and making a face. "Then let's make it cheap," Jon said, and if there was a god listening, it must have leaned in then. The god would have liked the arrogance because gods enjoy what men fear. The gods could wait. There was a bridge to be measured, and a girl with a scar on her lip who needed boots, and a boy who had stolen a loaf who needed to be told that he would not be beaten, and a lord whose steward had bent to pick up a coin who would take a longer time learning that he had done the right thing. Beyond the rain, beyond the city, a cloud gathered over the step of the stepstones, and a man with a soft voice and quick hands told himself he had forgiven the world for making him small, and then did not. In Old Town, a man grew angry at a footnote, which is a dangerous thing to do. In the Vale, a hawk dove and took a rabbit, and a girl watched it and thought of law. In Dorne, a woman drew a circle on her table and said, "Here," to a map that had many places for here. In the Iron Islands, a weather change made a sailor wake from a dream with his hand on his knife and his heart like a mallet. The road would bring faster travel for grievances. It would bring faster travel for help. It would bring knives and bread with equal speed. That was the bargain. That was the balance. Jon walked back into the hall and did not sit the chair. He ran his hand along the back of it as if it were a horse he would not ride yet, and perhaps never, which made the horse flick its ear were it a horse. He stood at the window and watched the rain smooth the city into something that looked, from here, like a single thing. Ghost sat and leaned against his leg, and together they watched as a man in gray-black crossed the yard and lit the watchhouse lamp because it had grown dark and people would need to see. The rain moved on with a seafarer's patience, leaving behind a city rinsed thin and honest. Runnels still chased themselves in the grooves of the stones. A gull landed on the window ledge and shook itself, scattering diamonds into the yard, and flew away as if it had decided against conversation. John's hair was damp long after he had dried it, and the skin at the back of his neck felt new, as though the sky had peeled it and replaced it carefully without malice. He went to the ledger room at first light. It was not a throne room and not a counting house and not a chapel, though it borrowed habits from all three. Tables ran the length of it, built straight and plain, their edges worn already by the passage of hard hands. Windows high on the wall let in a square of cold day, so even the ink looked blue. Boards on each wall held lists in a scribe's neat hand, and chalked additions beside them made the pages feel alive in a way the bound books of Old Town never had to him. Grain in, grain out, oil in, oil allotted to lamps by mile markers, numbers written like promises that could be broken only with difficulty and shame. Sam stood at the end of the room with a boy on either side of him and a girl standing on a stool to reach the high shelf. He read from a parchment and stopped now and again to ask the children what the numbers meant. He was teaching them the inglorious magic of addition and the severe mercy of subtraction. When he saw John at the door, he did not break his sentence. He finished it, set his thumb on the page to mark his place, and said, "There's a line at the gate to sign for bread." "There would be," Davos said from behind John, drying his beard with a cloth. He smelled of rain and salt. "Words out." Sansa's first instruction had been taken from thought to habit with a speed that told John the world had been waiting for someone to make a different kind of excuse. A fund for bread not tied to the oath. You swore because you wanted the work. You ate because you were alive in a city, and a city should not let its people starve while it argued what to call itself. "Show me," John said, outside under the new-built shed whose roof was still too bright for the old square. A line curled like a river along the street and doubled back. Women with babies on hips. Men with scars from wars they had not wanted and had not escaped. Children with the look he had known on the wall. The hollowed eyes that seem larger because hunger sharpens the rest of the face away. A baker in black and gray took down names in chalk on a slate, slow and patient. Another handed out loaves of a size measured yesterday by Sam's string. A third stood with a bucket of water and told people to drink now and save their bread for later. The bucket had a dipper, and men did not lower their faces to it like dogs. They used the dipper carefully and wiped it with a cloth between turns. That simple decency made John feel proud of a city that was only just making itself. "Some will tell it as if you bought soldiers with barley," Davos said. "We've word from 3 lords already who call it that." "They will," John said. "They are men who have only seen bread used to buy things." A woman was scolding the baker about the shape of the loaf. She wanted one with a heel because the heel went crisp when toasted and the child liked it. The baker told her he would swap when he came to it. She said, "I won't forget." And he said, "Don't," as if debts could be kind. "Will we have enough?" Davos asked. "Enough never," Sam said, appearing with the slate under his arm, as if he had predicted the shape of the question. "Enough today, yes. Gendry found a miller who owed him a favor, and I reminded him of it with terrible politeness. He sent flour. If we get 2 more, we're safe through the week." "Write it," John said. "I am writing it," Sam said. "I will be writing until the world is quieter than I dare hope. That's the day I stop." Before noon, a free rider came in with a red scarf knotted around his arm as badge of hire and a look of indignation that tried to pass for outrage and failed. He brought news in chunks like a poor actor swallowing his lines. Bits of it too fast, bits of it too slow. A dead man, dockside, fisherman, not from here, from upriver. Lord's nephew, sword, a girl, says he was provoked. Says the man struck first. The rider licked his lips. Says he'll answer to his lord only. People who believed that law was the same thing as habit often thought they would be spared by either. John felt his stomach arrange itself around the old sensation. The way a room shifts when the thing you have promised the world is invited to prove itself. "Name," he said. "The dead man's." The rider looked surprised. "I didn't ask. Nobody asked." "What was the girl's name?" John asked. "Didn't ask that either," the rider said more slowly. Now you will, John said. Go back and ask. Tell them we'll hold court at the dragon pit at dusk. Tell the Lord he should bring his nephew and every story he has ready. Tell the dead man's friends to come and say his name out loud. Tell the girl to sit and drink water and know that when we say we'll hear her, we mean it. The rider hesitated. They won't like that. The dead man liked drowning less, Davos said, so gently that the rider blushed as if he'd been slapped. He left at a trot. Better to hold it at a watch house, Tyrion said, arriving with 2 papers in his hand, one of them damp around the edges as if he had used it to fan his face. I know the dragon pit is yours like the city is yours, but a thing grows the way you plant it. Court belongs where it will be habitual, humiliating, boring. The dragon pit makes everything feel like a story. Tonight, the story will matter, John said. This will not be the last, but it will be the first. And the first thing a city learns about itself, it rarely forgets. Sam looked at him over the edge of his parchment with an expression John had learned to translate. You will pay something for that choice. He nodded back. I know. We will pay it together. The dragon pit gathered people like a wound gathers fever. Word outran the rider and wore different faces when it arrived. By late afternoon, the tears were a low roar. The evening light came in at an angle, finding the dust and making it into something almost holy. John stood on a plank platform that had been built and rebuilt 3 times in the past month as uses changed and carpenters argued. Ghost lay at the edge of it with his chin on his paws, eyes half-lidded, the very picture of disinterest. Tyrion had contrived to arrange the benches so that no man's retinue could sit in a block large enough to intimidate without turning their backs on someone who might count them later. The Lord arrived with the slanting confidence of a man who had never been told that the ground held him up as a favor and not an obligation. He was middle years, sleek, with hands that had never split on a rope and a mouth shaped by good honey. His nephew was a youth with the viciousness of someone not yet required to be either brave or ashamed. The boy's cloak was blue. His sword belt was good leather. There was a smear of something at his cuff. Blood, wine, pomegranate. The dead man came in pieces. A boat pushed by 2 men with shoulders like doorposts. A blanket. A fish knife laid on the cloth as if it were a relic. The voices of 3 women who had loved him. His name came to Edrin, son of Sul, from a village up the Mander where the river bent and made a beach out of stones. The women said it like a prayer and like an anchor and like a threat to the world that would forget him. The girl came and sat on a stool with her hands in her lap and a cut along her cheekbone scabbed in brown. She had braided her hair back too tight. She kept swallowing. She could not be older than 16. She looked at the people and then at John and then at the floor as if it would tell her how to survive. John let the murmur run itself quieter. He let the late light move 3 fingers along the edge of the platform. He let the city settle not into silence but into a listening that had a sway to it, like a ship in a small swell. Speak his name, he said to the women. They did. Edrin, Edrin, Edrin. Say what happened, he said to the girl. She told it like a person dragging a net. Not in order at first, catching on things, tripping on the facts, hauling herself forward by them when they gave way. She had met the boy at the dock where she sold conger. He had said that her hair was wasted on a fishmonger's daughter. She had said she could cut her hair and his coin purse both and he would not notice which hurt more. He had laughed. He had put his hand on her wrist without asking. She had told him not to. He had told her his name as if it were a talisman. When she had pulled away, he had followed her into the shadow of a net house and said he would teach her courtesies. She had pushed him. He had struck her with the heel of his hand and said she would like him when he was done. The dead man had been taking a pail of fish guts to the ditch and had thrown it instead at the boy to make him stop. The boy had drawn his sword like a truth that would make the world bow. The dead man had put up his hands and said, I don't want trouble. The boy had made trouble. Did he say that? John asked. Did Edrin, son of Sul, say that? Yes, one of the women said, and another said, he said it twice, and the third said, he always said it, as if that were both complaint and liturgy. The boy's uncle stepped forward, lip bent in contempt that he had ironed flat on the way from his hall and had wrinkled again on the street. "These are Doc's stories," he said. "They are told 100 times a day, and half of them are lies. Then let half of them be rightly punished," Tyrion murmured, low enough that only Jon and Davos heard. The boy lifted his chin as if he had learned in a school how to make defiance look like noble sorrow. "He struck me," he said. "I defended myself. With a sword," Davos said, scratching his ear. "A bold choice against a fish." The Lord drew himself up. "You will not mock my house." "I don't know your house," Davos said. "Nor do I need to. There's a dead man and a girl with a bruise and a boy with a sword and a smell of blood and guts. That's all I need to know to begin with." The crowd made a noise then, not approval, not derision, something like relief when a man says the obvious thing and the obvious thing holds. Jon looked at the boy. "If you tell me the truth," he said, "I will not make you a hero of your house. I will not make you a monster of the docks. I will make you a man who did wrong and must pay for it. If you lie, I will make you something worse." The boy's face shifted. He looked at his uncle. The uncle's eyes said, "A story has been agreed on." He looked at the girl and her eyes said, "If you lie, I will live with it, but you will not." He looked at the women, and their faces said, "We have buried men we love. Ed and learn tight mouths from it." He looked at Ghost, and the wolf's eyes said nothing human at all and everything that mattered. "I pushed her," the boy said. As if the words were pebbles he had to spit out one by one. "I hit her when she clawed me. I drew my sword because I was angry. He threw filth at me. I did not mean to kill him." He sounded like a child arguing over a broken toy. "I did not mean." "You meant to frighten them," Jon said. "You meant to take what did not belong to you, and you meant to make the world your excuse." The uncle stepped forward again. "You have no right." "I have the oath," Jon said. "And the lamps, and the bread, and the other men's knees that bend when they would rather not and straighten when they should. I have the work. That is right enough." The sentence was a thing he had already decided without knowing all the names. He had spoken to Sansa and to Sam and to the woman with the plumline mind and to Davos, and they had given him the same answer with different words. Make him pay. Not coin. Not blood. Use him. The city has holes.
I can feel one.
"You will go to the North Road with the first party," Jon said to the boy. "You will live in a watchhouse and carry stone and oil and dig ditches and learn every name on the levy slate by heart. You will go to every door on that mile and ask if their weights are fair, and if they have bread, and if anyone has frightened them, and if they have, you will come to your captain and tell him because you are not brave enough yet to meet that alone. You will carry the bodies of those who die on the road and lay them straight and wash them and say their names. When that mile is done, you will go to the next. You will do this until the women of Edrin's house tell me they are ready to say stop." The Lord's voice came sharp. "You cannot." "I can," Jon said, and there was no heat in it at all. "And I will." The boy swallowed as if his throat had found a bone. "How long?" "As long as they say," Jon said. He turned to the women. "Will you come to the watchhouse on the North Road at the banner with the missing leaf and say when you have had enough?" The oldest woman, who had the expression of someone whose grief had cut its own channels a long time ago and now simply flowed in them, looked at the boy and at her companions and then at Jon. "We will," she said. "We will come together. We will say together. He will carry long." The girl on the stool lifted her chin. "And I?" she asked, as if daring the world to forget the part where she had become a person in a story rather than a piece of scenery. Jon met her eyes. "You'll come to the ledger room in the morning," he said. "Sam will pay you for the fish you didn't sell today. And if you want a post, he will take you as a clerk. You keep your figures as well as any scribe I've met. If you don't want a post, you will go on with your life and know that if any man puts his hand on you without asking, he will lose the use of it, at least for a while." A laugh went through the crowd like a wind through tall grass. It had relief in it and cruelty in it and a little joy at seeing the balance corrected. The Lord's mouth made an O and then a line, as if he had remembered that his face belonged to him and other people's gaze did not. Afterward, Tyrion sat on the edge of the platform and swung his legs like a boy who ought not to be anywhere near such a place and found it perfect. "You made a law for the day," he said. "Tomorrow you'll have to make a law for the next day and find a way to write yesterday so that it doesn't bite you when it grows teeth." "That's why I have you," Jon said. "You have me because I'm too stubborn to be killed and too clever to be loved," Tyrion said lightly, but the lightness wasn't all of it. "You put the boy to work. The Lord will stew. He will write to his friends. He will summon the old habits like dogs to heel. He will say you made his house carry a peasant's grief like a pack. He will be right, and that is why it will hurt." "I want it to hurt," Jon said, surprising himself with the nakedness of it. Tyrion sighed, a sound that came from deep and took a while to leave him. "That is the thing you must pay for, then. Not his pain. Yours." That night, candles burned late in houses where they had not burned in years except for wakes. People told the story. They made it cleaner where it needed mess and messier where it needed clean. They made Jon taller and the boy smaller, and they added 3 more slaps and took away the pail of guts because it made the tale laugh when it should make it sober. A woman took her daughter's hand and said, "If anyone touches you without asking, you go to the watch house." A man who liked to throw his weight around in alehouses drank water and went home early. In the charnel house, where the air held the clean tang of lime and the deeper, more lawful smell of death done with attention, the man who had tried to kill Jon washed bones and wrapped them in cloth and learned the names of joints and where things fit. The woman who oversaw the work had not asked his story. She had asked the dead their names and put the knife out of his reach and told the living to leave him to it. He dreamed at night of a life without edges and woke with his mouth gritty from the lime dust, and thought, "This is what punishment is for, perhaps, to give a man a task he cannot fail at by doing it with his whole self." The next day the Archmaester arrived in person. He came with 2 men younger than he was, thin as quills and twice as likely to snap, and with a woman who took notes in a tiny, precise script with a crow's feather cut so fine it looked like a needle. He presented himself in the ledger room because he had listened to Sam's letter and understood the place where the heart was now. "Books," he said by way of greeting, looking around at the chalk lists with the same mixture of disdain and awakening respect with which a man who has only ever eaten sweetmeats regards a potato field. "We prefer them bound. You prefer them breathing." "Bound is better for remembering," Sam said. "But living is better for living." "I won't argue the obvious," the Archmaester said dryly. He looked at Jon. "You've moved a great deal of water with the cup you have. You'll need a canal to move what comes next. Build it with me," Jon said, "or write to me why I'm wrong." The Archmaester's mouth tried out a smile and found it acceptable. "You have a priest's way of asking for help," he said. "It flatters a man's sense of duty and makes him forget that he is tired." He moved to a board. He read the numbers. He asked a question about axle widths and winter heave and the lifespan of a plank bridge under different weights. He asked about how often the lamps were trimmed and how many men had learned to take apart a bad scale and make it good and put it back together without breaking it. He asked about the cost of boredom. "We're trying to make boredom our weapon," Tyrion said from a corner, emerging as he always did when there was ink. "It has fewer poets to defend it and more uses." The Archmaester turned. "You're the one who likes to set a thing on fire and then write a song about the smoke." "I've no gift for song," Tyrion said mildly. "I build scaffolds for other men's choruses, and I prefer water to fire these days. It burns slower." They fenced lightly, and the woman with the crow's feather wrote as if she were catching midges. When the Archmaester left, he did it with an inclination of the head so small that it might have been accidental. Jon knew better. There was a book open in Old Town now with a page that began, "On the use of public numbers to restrain private greed." Not a day passed without a story that could have broken the back of all of it. A cart crushed a boy's foot and the wheelwright fled rather than face the mother. The watch found him and brought him, not with his hair dragged and blood in his mouth, but with hands tied and dignity intact, and he stood and listened to the mother's grief and paid what he had and took on work he would not have chosen and did it in such a way that other men who had fled in their days thought differently about whether running was still the cheapest thing. A message came from the neck. It was written on bark with a stylus and smelled of swamp and resin. It said, "You build roads. Roads bring men. Men bring knives. We prefer water and reeds. If your road comes to us, it will become lost." Jon read it aloud to Tyrion and to Davos and to Sam and to Tormund, who had wandered in with a stick of cured meat in his hand and the air of a man who had been using his strength honestly and was content with it. "It's a fair warning," Davos said. "It's a dare," Tormund said. "It's both," Tyrion said, smiling thinly. "It is also a negotiation written in poetry. He's telling you he is a knife you cannot hold with your usual hand." "Send bread," Jon said.
Sam blinked.
"Bread. Send bread and oil and a book," Jon said. "Not a law book. A story. Something old. Something their grandfathers told them when they were boys. Tell them we'll bring the road to the edge of their reeds and no farther. Tell them we'll build a ferry that needs no toll and no lord to oversee it, and that the ferry will be theirs if they keep it moving for everyone. If they refuse, we'll let the mud have the last word, and so will they." "What book?" Sam asked, already turning titles in his mind. "The one about the man who turned into a pike because he wanted to stay in the water forever," Jon said. He hadn't known he knew it until he said it. He remembered the old voice of a man with a face like weather telling a little boy a story to push the night back a few feet. They wrote. They sent the bread wrapped carefully against moisture. They sent the oil sealed wax tight, and they sent the book. A short, blunt story copied by a girl whose letters were the same size from beginning to end because she had not learned yet to falter. A month later, a man with a frog tattooed on his throat came and sat in the ledger room and said, "We'll keep your ferry moving.
Notoi.
But no soldiers on it. If the men with swords wish to cross, they'll wade." "Agreed," Jon said, and they shook forearms, and the man's eyes were wary and curious and alive. There would be trouble later. There is always trouble later. For now, the ferry moved and the road ended where water began, and the people in the reeds watched the lamps on the far bank and made up their minds slowly. On the 28th day, the city woke with a headache. Someone had posted a notice in a beautiful hand on the doors of 3 watchhouses. The notices were identical, in ink blacker than even Sam liked, with an ornamented border that made an insult look like a wedding invitation. It said, "The so-called watch now sets itself above gods and lords. They eat the bread of the poor to buy their obedience. They steal from honest men with levies. They demand your names as if your names were theirs to keep. Men with no sons always think they can tell other men how to raise theirs. Men with no lands think they own the roads. Refuse their bread. Refuse their lamps. Refuse their courts. Come to the true court where coin and faith still matter." "What's the true court?" Davos asked, turning the paper to look for a signature that wasn't there. "An alley where men who like to say coin and faith more than they like to spend either stand around and remember what it felt like to matter," Tyrion said. "We'll tear these down. We'll write our own notices. We'll make them less pretty. The world will trust them more." "Don't tear them down," Jon said. "Don't." Tyrion's eyebrows went up as if pulled by puppet strings. "Leave them," Jon said. "Next to them, post our ledger. Post where the levies went. Post how many loaves and how many lamps. Post the number of names on the bread slate and the number of men and women who swore the oath and the number of days a child slept in a watchhouse because their father was drunk. Numbers. Let the city decide." "You keep asking for a reckoning as if you'll like it," Tyrion said. "One day, it will decide you are wrong. Then I'll be wrong," Jon said. "That's better than being a man who was never judged." They posted the numbers. The notices stayed and weathered, and the ink bled where the rain found it. Men paused and read both. Some spat at the one with the ornamented border because it looked like their master's handwriting. Some spat at the ledger because it looked like Sam's. Many read and said nothing and carried the words home and told their old mothers or their wives or their sons, and the old mothers and the wives and the sons made the decision when the men were elsewhere, and the decision was often, "Bread tastes better than pride." The veil called him. The letter came sealed in white, plain. It had no ornament and no apology, which he liked better than both when they were false. "Bring no banners," the letter had said, and so he did not. He took Davos and the girl with the scar on her lip, because she had been his clerk for 20 days and had already seen through 3 men who thought to cheat the bread slate. He took no more. Ghost padded beside them and at the foot of the mountain stayed and watched the sky as if it were another kind of sea and he a different wolf on it. The way up was, as he remembered from tales, narrow, the wind like a hand that pushes and yanks, the sky so close it seemed a thing you could step off. A boy with eyes too blue to be kind had once been Lord here. Now the Lord was something else. A girl with a name that would become a story, or a woman with a manner that would, or both. He found her on a ledge where the wind made music out of her hair, and the stone could have learned to fly if it had asked. "You came," she said, without warmth and without calculation. She had gray in her plates not because she was old but because the mountain had given it to her like salt. "I wanted to see if men who make roads know how to walk where there are none." "I know how to watch my feet," he said. She smiled at that, a small thing, as if he had answered a different question well enough to get another. "You want courts here," she said. "You want lamps. I want women to walk at dusk," he said. "And for men who sell furs not to be stripped of them and thrown from a pass because they couldn't pay a toll chiseled from habit. You will make this place unromantic," she said. "Romance has always been work when you look close at it," he said, surprising both of them. "Work and blood and a pile of rocks with a plan." She looked out over the world, so small from here that all of men's little burnings seemed like smuts on a hearthstone. "If I give you leave," she said, "you will be boring?" "I will be duller than dust," he said. "I will listen to men argue about a boundary stone until the stone chips from boredom. And when a man refuses to come to your court because it is not romantic enough for his pride, I will go to him," John said. "And I will bring the ledger and the lamp and a loaf, and I will sit at his table and eat the bread and make note of it and show him the lamp and tell him it will be lit whether he comes or not." "You bribe and you shame," she said. "You leave little for pride to eat." "I leave it work," he said. "It doesn't like that taste." She regarded him as a hawk regards the slope of air, considering the lift and the cost. "You will build 2 watchhouses at the passes," she said. "I will send my own to sit in them with yours. I will count your levies. I will send you men twice a year to see if you have grown teeth beyond the ones you show in your smile. If you have, I'll pull them. If you have not, I'll bring you a cake." "I will take the cake," he said. "And the teeth." She nodded and turned and went, and the wind sat down around them as if this had exhausted its interest for the day. On the way down, the girl with the scar said, "She's like a fair weight, heavy and right." "She is," John said, pleased by the use of the language the ledger room had given her. "And she knows it." When they returned to the city, they returned to a fire. It was not a great fire. It did not turn the sky orange and make song. It was a watchhouse fire, born of oil and night and malice, and it did its job well. It drew men in 2 ways, either to help or to watch, either to carry water or to cheer. John saw it from the ridge on the road, a low chimney of smoke that tried to be taller than it could. Ghost yelped once, not in fear, but in alertness, and broke into a run. John followed with the speed of a man who had made a promise to a city and found that the city had decided to test the edge of it. They reached it with lungs that hurt. The roof had gone. The beam across the doorway had fallen. 2 men were heaving at it with bare hands and got splinters and bled for nothing. The girl with the scar had a bucket line going with a competence that shut men up. Tormund arrived from nobody knew where with 5 free folk and a grin like a crack in granite. "Buckets or beams?" he asked John, not stopping for the answer, grabbing a beam. "Beams," John said, and they threw their backs against the weight and lifted it like a prayer. Slowly, with groans, with curses that felt like benedictions because they were honest. The beam came up the inch that makes a difference, and they held it and breathed, and someone else pulled a man in gray-black out by the boots, and the man coughed and then retched and then swore he would never smoke again, which made no sense and made everyone laugh and made them able to lift another inch. The fire went down at last because it had been fed less than it had eaten. The watchhouse stood in a shape that it could learn to be again, with black fingers in the air and a floor strewn with the brittle ghosts of things. John stood in the muck and smoke and looked at the wall on which the ledger had been posted. and saw that the numbers had run. He felt something sharp and strange in him, not rage, but a refusal to let the world be made small by someone else's smallness. "Light the lamp," he said. His voice sounded wrong in his own ears, scratchy, like a man who had breathed smoke. "Trim the wick and light it now, before you sweep." "It's not night," a boy panted. "It will be," John said, "and people will need to see." They lit it. The wick had soaked water and oil both and sputtered and went out and then took and then steadied and burned. The sight of it made the little crowd relax in a way no speech would have done. There is a holiness in things that do what they are meant to do. Tyrion came, late, with his hair singed at the ends and a look that suggested he had been rescuing papers from a different fire started by a candle knocked into a pile of scents. He stood with John and watched the lamp flame a while. "Men will set more fires," he said. "They will," John said. "Write a law," Tyrion said. "Not about fire, about lamps. If a lamp goes out in a watchhouse, someone will go to prison. If a lamp is lit, it must be fed. Make the lamp into a thing that can be used against itself. Men like that less than laws about arson." "Do it," John said, and Tyrion nodded, already composing the boring, brutal sentences. That night, with the smell of smoke still in his hair, John went to the ruined sept again and stood under the open space where once there had been colored glass and now there were stars. Ghost paced, sat, paced, then lay down with a huff. John thought of the boy carrying stone under the eyes of the women he had hurt, and of the lamp steady on its chain, and of the ferry moving because men were stub, born in a way he could respect. He thought of roads like lines on a palm and wished that reading them felt more like fate and less like obstinacy. Sam came and stood beside him without greeting, the way friends do when they know greeting is a way to hide from something that will remain after words are done. "The charnel house man," Sam said. "He asked to see you." "Why?" John asked. "He said he owned a knife this big," Sam held his hands, "and that he thought it would be the thing he used to write his name on the world. And then he said he knows he was a fool and asked if there was a way to give up the knife without giving up the use of his hands. I didn't know what to tell him, so I told him to wash another skull and think of how smart a head looks when it is clean." John laughed, and the sound surprised both of them, and then he was not laughing. "Bring him tomorrow," he said. "Take him to the Rose Road watchhouse with Tormund and make him carry water until his arms ache. If he runs, let him run, but tell him if he returns he will find the bucket where he left it and the water a little warmer than before. If he stays, let him stay, and take the knife from him and make him sharpen the lamp's trimming shears." Sam nodded, as if this answer were a page that had been waiting to be written. "They'll keep coming with knives," Sam said, not as worry, not quite even as prediction, just as a number entered in a column that already had a title. "I know," John said. "We'll keep giving them buckets." He slept that night as men sleep after work that ends in flame. Too hard at first and then in fits with images like embers. When he woke, the city was wide awake without the habit of fear that had lived in it like an extra lung. He dressed and went down among it and did not think of whether he was a king or a steward or only a man trying to carry something that had been given to him and could not be put down without crushing someone else. Days made a rope. They were knots tied by weather and hunger and the occasional intrusion of nobility. A lord of the Reach came to complain that the Waymaster had treated him like any other man. John told him the Waymaster would be punished by being thanked in public. The lord found himself applauded in the market and went home understanding nothing. A Septon wept when he read the ledger aloud and found that numbers could make a sermon shameful. A smith's apprentice forged a counterfeit levy coin and brought it to the watchhouse himself to show them where it was wrong and to ask if he could have a job keeping other men from doing it better. A message came from Dorne with a drawing on it of a lamplighter's pole, slender and elegant, that some artisan in Sunspear had devised so that the lamps could be trimmed by a woman not much taller than the lamp itself. John ordered 10 and then 20 more, and when the first arrived, he stood in the street and watched a girl lift the wick with the tool and crimp it neat and clean, and felt a satisfaction more complete than any victory over an army. Sansa sent men who knew the talk of marsh and the talk of timber. She sent a woman who had kept the books at Winterfell through 2 hard winters and had learned to make columns that did not lie even when men begged them to. She sent a boy with wild hair and a love of rope who made a bridge from nothing but twine and stubbornness and then turned it into something you could walk across. She sent, in one letter, a single sentence, "Remember that routine is a kind of mercy." He wrote back, "I am learning it," and she sent a cake that tasted of cinnamon and a ribbon for the girl with the scar that nobody mentioned and everybody saw, and the girl wore it like armor. The boy who carried stones learned how to ask a woman twice if she was done being grieved at and once more for himself so that he would know. He learned that men talk more easily when you have something in your hands, so he always had something in his hands. He learned the names of the women of Edrin's house and the names of their children and the names of their dead. And he learned that duty lifts a thing in you that pride cannot touch. When he finished the first mile, the women came and stood and looked and did not speak for a time, and then the youngest said, "It is a good mile," and the oldest said, "It is long," and the middle one took a breath and said, "Carry the next one with another boy," and he did, with a steadiness that made his uncle drink alone. A year is a big word. John never said it. He said day and next and again. He said until and after. He said lamp. He said bread. He said court. He said river and axle and ferry and bridge and list and name and hear and listen and say it again. He found that the world grew around those small words and left him less space to fail. Not all of it went the way a man building a thing draws it on a board. A woman in black and gray took bribes to move a line of chalk where a shop jutted. She did it because her sister was ill and the apothecary was not kind to those without coin. John stood in a room and listened to her say it and did not say, "You are forgiven." He said, "You knew the chalk was the world and you moved it." He made her sit in a room for a month and hear petitions and say no to every man who asked for what the world could not give. At the end of it, he paid the apothecary himself and made him tape a notice to his door that said the watch would pay for a certain list of physic until the next harvest. The woman came back to the watch house and picked up her baton with a hand that had learned its own shake and did not pass it on. The Faith wrote again. Their letters were softer around the edges now and felt like cloth that had been washed many times and still held its color. They wanted his courts to take confession. He told them confession belonged in a room with candles and not in a room with scales. They wanted his levees to end on holy days. He told them bread was most needed then. They wanted his oaths to include mercy. He told them mercy was a kind of ledger as cruel as any if you kept it badly. They argued without knives, which was a peace he had not expected and never ceased to admire. Once a ship came in with the plague. No one called it that until it had already touched 3 lives and taken 1. They called it a fever, then a rash, then a misfortune. John called it by its name the morning Sam told him in a voice deeper than fear, and the city flinched at the word but did not run. They lit more lamps. They boiled water in the squares. They took bread to doors and left it there and did not touch arms when they did it. They set a cordon that was a cordon of tenderness and not of threat, and it held. The ship burned at anchor at last, an orange sorrow. The men who had eaten in the ledger room put their hands in the sink and scrubbed until their skin hurt and then wore it like a badge. There were nights when John dreamt of a chair made of swords and woke with his hand on his own sternum, as if he had been keeping something inside from breaking out. There were mornings when he stood in the yard and watched the girl with the ribbon light a lamp and thought, "If this is all I do, let it be this." There were afternoons when a lord came with a grievance that made sense and John had to say yes to a thing that tasted like sawdust because compromise is not cowardice. He learned to endure being misunderstood by those who meant well and to refuse to be defined by those who did not. He went north at last. He went because the year had turned and the roads had not yet learned to hold their shape in frost, and the men who had made them feared their own workmanship. He went because the wall was a word in his mouth that had not been spoken aloud in too long. He took a small party and a large quiet. Ghost ran ahead and made the kind of prints that make men tell stories about what else walks the world. He found the snow not as he had left it. Nothing ever is, but still itself, and the cold touched his bones as if they were old friends. He stood at the ruins of a gate and put his palm on the old stone and said nothing and thought everything. At the weirwood at Winterfell he knelt. He did not pray. He let the tree's silence weigh him. He thought of the oath he had altered and of the one that had made him. He thought of men he had lost, and of a woman with silver hair, and of a child who had not been, and of a copy of himself that had died and left him to the work. He stood and dusted the snow from his knees and went to Sansa and was warmed in a way the cold could not answer. "Your roads hold," she said. "Not perfectly, but enough." "Enough," he said. "You have enemies," she said. "More than you think. Fewer than you fear." "You always say the right numbers," he said. "That is because I count not what men say but what they cannot help doing," she said. "And I see more cakes in your future if you go on making boredom your tactic." "What do you see if I don't?" he asked. "I see a beautiful failure," she said. "And I don't want to bury another of those." They sat by the fire and did the things he had missed. They argued about small matters. They laughed at things that would not bear the weight of city. They ate cake with their fingers and did not wipe them on law. At night he walked the ramparts and let the cold remind him of what he had been and of a vow that had been a set of clothes he had outgrown and still kept folded. On the way south, he stopped at the ferry at the edge of the neck. It moved steadily under a sky that had learned autumn's color. The man with the frog tattoo took his coin and returned it and said, "We have a ledger," and showed him a piece of bark with marks that meant number and name and notches for storms. John gave him a loaf and took a smoked fish, and they called it even, and it was. Back in the city, the lamp in the burned watch house had been polished under ash. Someone had hung a small scrap of wood under it with a word cut into it so shallowly you had to lean close to read it. Said again. He did not know who had cut it. He did not ask. He did not need to. Tyrion met him in the yard with an armful of papers and a grin that was not cheerful. "You have been invited to a wedding," he said. "Yara wishes to mock the gods again and does not need our permission. She asked for oil instead. I told her the ceremony would be dull if we did not attend, and she said that was exactly why she wanted us there." "I'll go," Jon said. "Dull weddings make peaceful mornings." "And you have been sued," Tyrion said almost cheerfully. "By whom?" "The lord whose nephew is learning what a mile feels like," Tyrion said. "He has found a clever scribe who thinks law is an art and not a craft. He claims you exceeded your charter. He claims you demeaned his house in public. He claims your levy is theft. He claims many things, and we will answer in a court we do not own because that is what you chose for us." "Good," Jon said. "We'll lose something. We'll win something. We'll write down both." "You are either the most patient man I've met or the most stubborn," Tyrion said. "I am still deciding which is more dangerous." Davos clapped Jon on the back with a hand like a plank. "Dangerous to the right men, I hope," he said. "I'll sit at the back and cough when the Lord says something stupid." "Bring a cloth," Sam said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "And a ledger. Always a ledger." The court was held in a hall that had once been used for something grand and was now better suited to men with too much time and paper. The judge, not of the watch, wore a robe that had survived moths and insult. The Lord Scribe spoke quickly and used Latin phrases where the common tongue would have done, which made the people yawn and the judge sit up because men like to be flattered by obscurity. Tyrion answered in the common tongue and used numbers like ropes, and when the scribe tried to cut them, he found that he had given himself less room to breathe. The Lord's face reddened at certain phrases and whitened at others, and at the end of it the judge, who had been thinking of his dinner, said words that meant, "You may collect your levies if you post them publicly. You may accept people into your service if you also feed those you turn away. You may shame men with the lamp if you do not delight in it." The scribe called it a draw. Tyrion called it a bargain. "It forces us to do what we already meant to," Tyrion said, pleased. "And it makes the men who hate us say it was their idea." "Good," Jon said. "Let their mouths do some of our work." The girl with the scar came to him one evening with her slate under her arm and a look like a person about to jump from a height she had measured twice and believed would not kill her. "I want to take the oath," she said. "You already serve," he said. "I want it anyway," she said, "because I like bread and numbers and lamps, and because I like saying no to men who think I must say yes. I want to say I have no sons and mean it with my whole mouth." He looked at her and thought of the way the oath lived now. Not only guarding a wall but building roads and being bored and being steady and being the thing that quietly undid men who wanted to be interesting at other people's expense. "Then say it," he said, and they went to the courtyard and stood under the lamp at dusk, and she spoke and he answered, and Ghost sneezed at the exact moment she said realm's shadow in the light, and they both laughed and knew the oath had taken, because laughter and law make a better seal than blood. Winter would come again. It always does. Men would try to break this thing. They always do. There would be knives and fires and letters with ornamented borders and books that cut and heal in the same paragraph. There would be days when the lamp went out because someone had forgotten to trim it. There would be nights when the lamp burned brighter because someone remembered in time. John stood at the high window as autumn took the city by degrees, gold leaf by leaf, and he watched a line of small figures walking the road with batons at their belts and slates under their arms and a wolf at their side and a ledger in their heads. And he thought, I did not take a throne. I made a thing that might outlast me if I am careful, and if I am not, it will teach the one after me how to be. Ghost pressed his head against John's thigh. John set his hand on the wolf and held it there, feeling the warmth and the breath and the steady, ridiculous fact of a life. In the yard below, the lamplighter went from post to post with the pole from Dorn, and the lamps took one by one, and the road made itself into a mild river of tame fire. The world could be kind when pushed, could be held to account when written, could be taught when bored, could be defended when lit. John did not sit the chair. He watched the lamps. He made a list in his head of what wanted doing tomorrow and what wanted doing now. He went to the ledger room. He took up a quill. He began again.